Welcome to Season 4 of FBC Seminoles' The Table podcast. This season is called Tell a Good Story. Storytelling is a natural part of human life, and we all do it in one way or another. But the most important story any of us tell is the one we tell ourselves. This series will help you train your inner narrator to align the dialogue in your head with the truth of God's story and His Word. Come break through the negative stories of our modern world and infuse the peace, patience, joy, and gratitude of life in Christ back into your own story. So pull up a seat and join us at the table.
All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back to the table, where we're in episode 2 of Tell a Good Story. And so, last week we talked about just that narrator that lives inside of our head, and that we all are having conversations with ourselves all of the time. And we've got to decide whether or not that conversation is going to be good and positive. And I think a good word for us to use is hopeful. I think that's the biblical word to use. Whether that's going to be a hopeful conversation, or is that going to be a negative or pessimistic conversation that we have with ourselves, right? And so we finished last week with the question, so how does one begin to tell a good story? Last week I made a comment of kind of this phrase that's been important to me: I will be present and positive. And that's really where I wanted to start today, was with that first little piece, I will be present. Because I really think that hope and that good story begins with being present-minded. And so I just want to start just in a very blanket sense, or a very blanket question, and say, when I say the words be present, what does that conjure up in your mind?
I think of listening to hear, not to respond. So like whenever you're present with somebody, instead of just listening to what someone's saying and thinking about what to respond, but actually just listening to what they're saying. I think of not being on your cell phone, being present with your kids, actually paying attention to what they're saying instead of brushing them off. Yeah, that's what I think of.
Listening just to listen. This is going to come up next week, but you ever do that with God? You ever just listen to Him instead of tell Him everything He needs?
That's good.
We'll get there. There. There's a thought, though. Okay, I love that, though, to be present. What else? What does that conjure up in your mind when we say be present?
To me, it means not thinking about all of the things that are coming next, like task-wise, or like,
yeah,
we have this in the evening, we have this tomorrow, I have to have this for tonight at group. Like, I just focusing and not being distracted with all of the thoughts you have for later in the future.
And so what do you say to somebody like me who says that's called responsible? That's being responsible, right? Like, what do you say to someone who would maybe defend themselves like that?
Well, I asked him today. I said, "Do you are you realizing everything we have like today? Like, are you realizing time? Like," and he's like, "It's fine. It's okay." Like, he was not worried about anything else coming up, just the thing that was in front of us.
I would coach myself in saying there's a difference between planning, responsible planning, and worry. Those are not the same
that's
thing.
good.
Right? That's not the same thing. And so oftentimes I label my worry as planning. And I don't think that's fair.
I agree.
That's not fair. And so maybe that's me trying to be overly positive about myself, right? But being present is releasing worry. It doesn't mean we can't plan or be measured. It does mean that there's an end to the plan, and at some point you actually have to execute in front of you the thing that you planned to do.
So it's kind of a release of control as well, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you think about if you're, and I'm sometimes if I'm in a task or something and and one of the kids comes up and needs something, I'm not really good about putting down what I'm doing. I'm usually like, give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and then, okay, so, and then what story are they telling themselves based off of that, right? That my time is more important than their time. But if I just stop for a second and just, like what Ryan was saying, just listen to what they have to say. And it may not amount to much, right? They may just be telling me something sort of random, but if I take the time to hear what they have to say and respond, not being distracted with my phone or whatever I'm working on, I think that changes who they are in a way, and it definitely changes our relationship. But I'm also releasing control over that situation, whether or not I have to get that done or not. I'm not in control of that.
The person that I know that is the very best at this is my wife. She is so good at just living in the moment, and not being bothered when she can't accomplish a task because a boy comes up and says, "Mama, I need," She's so good at it, and she lives I'm the kind of person that at 3:30 in the afternoon, I start thinking about, okay, I got to start cooking dinner in 30 minutes so that it'll be ready by the time, so we can sit down at 5 to eat, because we're going to be hungry. And if you ask my wife, like, when are we, why are you just sitting there? When are we going to like eat dinner? She would say, when we get hungry. Like, what do you mean, when are we going to eat? Duh. You know what I mean? But she's so good at just releasing that control and not having to constantly be living in the future. And because of that, she's able really to enjoy just what's right in front of her so much better than I am a lot of days, And so that's what I think of when I think of being present. How about this one? Is present-mindedness something that comes naturally or easily?
Are you saying like in general, or are you talking about society today?
Both. Well, let's just say in general, because we're going to talk about today's society. That's my next question. So, just generally speaking, is that attitude of present-mindedness, is that something that comes naturally or easily?
I think it depends on like your environment.
Okay.
Because wouldn't you say, if you're around people like that, isn't it easier to do that? You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
The only reason I say that is because the more time I spend with my family, because that's how my family is, they're like, there's no, just what I said earlier about, well, we're going to eat between 12 and 1, but knowing them, it may be 1:30.
Right. Time is a suggestion.
But it's much easier to be
and I can see Kendall's face like, yes.
It is easier to be more present and engaged, I think, at times, but except for the cell phones. Like, that's the one thing, in my opinion, that just gets in the way of everything. And I think that's a societal thing.
Well, it also depends on your lifestyle, too.
Okay.
Because if you don't have practice in a game and school and your job, like, you have the flexibility to be more just go with the flow, I guess. And not worry about the time or, But I'm definitely the one that's like, okay, we have to be at the game at 5:30. So if the kids want to eat before, I have to start cooking at 3.
Yeah.
It has to be ready when I pick them up from school. So I'm more of that.
Sure.
But I would say I don't think it comes natural. I don't know. Or it's not like a... But maybe that is because of society, not... that has conditioned you that way. But.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I think it also depends on if you're interested or not in what you're doing at the time, or like if it's something that interests you. I think we can be very present-minded, right? We're if it's a discussion that we're passionate about, I think we can be very engaged about that. Whatever, fill in the blank. But if it's something that's really not our thing, maybe we're counting down the minutes until we like, oh man, you know what? I really got to go check on this.
Or like an interruption, or like something that's like you have to tend to, but it's not necessarily like good, like sick kid, like something that you have to stop and do.
Like you can spend, I'm sure, 3 hours in your shop on a woodworking project and it feel like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's probably some aspect of your job that 5 minutes feels like 3 hours. And the whole time you're just thinking about what you could be doing or what you should be doing,
for sure.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Or when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't go back to sleep because you're thinking about the 12 things that you, right? I mean, you ever been there before, right? And sometimes I'll just tell myself, the best thing you can do right now to help yourself accomplish all these things is go to sleep, and I just try to convince myself.
How does that work?
Yeah, every now and then, maybe. But I do. Yeah, I just want us to think about this idea of presence, and I do think that it depends. Is kind of my answer. It depends on who you are. I think some people are naturally wired that way.
Yeah.
I'm not. And I don't think it's a bad thing to be measured. Structure is not a bad thing, and planning is not a bad thing. When all of your life is lived in an imagined future, that's when it becomes bad.
Yeah.
Because your imagination is not reality. And even though your imagination is good, if your whole life is lived in your imagined future, then how are you ever going to actually live? Right? But
then how do you enjoy
the future that you're trying to create?
Right, because whenever you get to that future, you can't even enjoy it because you're imagining something else.
And it's a great point. How does this idea, though, of being present fit in with our culture or the modern world? Is this something that the modern world is built on? Is the modern world good at it? Is our culture, is this a hallmark of our culture?
I think our culture is built on what's next.
Yeah.
I feel like everything is fast and immediate, and what's next?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, kids' attention spans now, I think that's part of it, right? That you can hold them that long, and you got to move on to the next thing. Constant stimulation, and so I think that's absolutely countercultural.
Yeah. You mentioned screen time, screens. What can you speak to that at all?
I feel like it doesn't even matter what series we get into. I always end up thinking about screen time and cell phones. I have like a vendetta against cell phones. Coming from someone who has a problem staying off their phone themselves.
Yeah.
Sure.
Makes sense.
I've always said that if I could snap my fingers like Thanos and get rid of them, I would, but
you have one in your pocket.
But I have one in my pocket.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it also just depends, because it could be anything though. Like, well, a show is screen time, but like sometimes if I'm reading a book, like that's what I'm reading it, and you have to put it away to be present with, So it could, it's not just.
I think you could replace that with just about anything, but
Sure.
A hobby or,
Yeah. I work in a high school, and so the culture that I'm around is the one AirPod in scrolling culture. The I can't even walk from one class to the next without listening to my music and scrolling through social media. I remember when I first started teaching, which was a decade ago, and you would walk out in the hallway and a student would come out of their class, and if you're going to pass that student in the hallway, when you got about 20 feet from them, you started a conversation, and you might talk, hey, so-and-so, how are you today? And then they would answer, and you might ask them about the game that they just played, whatever, Now, when you see that person, it is the most awkward, head down, AirPods come in, phone comes out, don't make eye contact, don't look at me. Just because that present interaction is so hard, and I'm not just picking on teenagers or trying to talk about youths these days. I am getting older, but I'm not that old, But I'm just saying, just goes to show that like the culture we live in is getting more and more busy, more and more occupied and preoccupied, and less here, now, present. What do you think about that?
I go back and forth because we've homeschooled some, sent some kids to public school, have some kids still at home. And I go back and forth because I know there's pros and cons to both. But the days that we, fall break or whatever, I'm just like, yes, we have a whole day. I don't have to rush y'all around. We can do whatever comes up. We can, whatever you want it. Like, there's more room to just, oh, you want to paint? Oh, we want to do this. You want to do that? Like, you can do all of those things without feeling the weight of the busyness of when school's in session or, So I go back and forth of what's best for us, but
yeah. And just living in that, almost like there's a compulsion to what's the next, like it's like we have this compulsive self that is determined by the world we live in. You have to be a certain way, look a certain way, wear a certain thing, eat a certain thing, post a certain thing on your Instagram, maintain a certain image, and that compulsive self, I think oftentimes puts our lives on autopilot so that we can keep up that image, keep up that, that obligation to fit in oftentimes, and being present forces us to actually reflect on that.
Yeah. Well, and you're creating that alternate reality, like you're talking about this, who I am in the public eye, yet I can't carry on a conversation with you personally, face to face. Yeah. And I see that with kids too. Like
never
my kids,
adults, though.
Right? Never. Yeah, only kids. Let's just bash kids for. But like I see in my own kids, like I make them order at the restaurant, or I make them, go up and ask for this or whatever for that reason, because I know in a lot of ways they don't do that. I know that they're walking the halls with their heads down, for the most part, because heaven forbid somebody talk to you, and that is so wild. But I mean, I think adults, I definitely can see us doing that as well. Instead of, engaging personally in conversation, it's just so much easier to disengage, and so much easier. I think we talked about it before, insulating and isolating.
Sure.
I think we talked about that before. It's so much easier to do that.
Right.
I have a sister that makes me think of, because how old is she now? She's 20, 21?
19, 20. Something around.
I think the first time she ever ordered in a restaurant, she was close to 18.
Wow.
I mean, would be moved to tears if my dad tried to make her order herself. I mean, just could not do it. Yep. And I was like, what is wrong with you? But it's crazy.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in the same household now. My parents, I have my own opinion about how they treat my younger
oldest kids, or almost oldest kids, man. We had it a little rougher.
Yeah.
I'm the baby.
Yeah. I always talk about that too, but it just, I feel for I really do feel for kids, honestly.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
The culture that they've grown up in, and this is going to make me feel old, but it is so different.
Yeah.
Than what I grew up in.
It really is. And if you don't work in a high school, you might think they're not. No, guys.
No,
it is a totally different world out there.
I believe it.
And much harder, I think.
I can tell you, I'm not trading the way I grew up for the way
absolutely.
trading it
That's
in.
the truth.
Absolutely not.
So,
no.
So I think this is a great kind of segue into where we're headed is, so how can someone tell a good story? And again, that term tell a good story means have a hopeful disposition and outlook on the world, right? That trust that God is alive, He's active, He's moving, and He's going to do what He said. How can someone tell a good story if they cannot recognize the story they are telling? If we're not present enough to hear ourselves talk to ourselves, how can we ever tell a good story if we can't even hear the story we're saying? If we never spend time even just listening to ourselves. Do you ever just stop and listen to yourself? Have you had this experience before where you're getting yourself all worked up about this, that, or the other, and then you just stop and have you ever said this to yourself? Would you listen to yourself for just a second? I mean, have you ever been there before? And normally, what comes next when you ask yourself that question? Would you listen to yourself? What are you doing in that moment?
I mean, normally it's going down a rabbit hole of thoughts that it's like a domino effect where you start thinking, oh, well, if this happens, then this will happen, then that'll happen.
And you're like, look how far away I am from what actually happened in this figment conversation that I'm having with people who don't even exist about something that they didn't even say. Right? And all of a sudden you're so mad at somebody, and then sometimes I'll catch myself and I'll be like, what am I mad at him? He didn't even do that.
Yeah.
Like, that's something I invented in my head. Would you just listen to yourself for a second, right? Being present is not just about being able to enjoy what's right in front of us, which it is. It's also about being able to listen to that conversation. If we want to tell a good story, we've got to be able to hear the story we're telling first, so that we can know if the story that we're telling is good or bad in the first place, right? If you're in the habit of listening to yourself, or when you catch yourself, typically, what would you say about yourself? Is that story positive or negative? What kind of story do you normally tell whenever you catch yourself and ask yourself, are you listening? Or, what do you think about you?
Usually if I get to that point, it's something negative that I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
I think I'm sometimes guilty about not letting myself be quiet enough to listen to myself, if that makes sense. Like, I may dog the teenagers for having one ear in, have music playing all the time, but if I'm working in the shop, or if I'm driving or I'm mowing, I typically have a book playing. Yeah. Because I don't do so well in the quiet. Yeah. There's always noise, and I think we've talked about that before too. Like, there's if we're at the house, we'll have the TV playing something in the background, or we'll have music on, while we're eating lunch, we'll have music playing in the background. Like, I don't know if I'm as good about just being quiet. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it depends, but usually when I'm to that point, I'm trying to tell myself, chill out, or you're trying to tell me to chill out. But to see if it's really, like you said, really even real what you're telling. You're like, did that even happen? Is that even true? But the times that I do get alone, if you're home and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to the store or whatever, I will just sit in silence, and I love it. I will just sit in silence because there's always noise. And so sometimes, even with music or like a sermon or I don't listen to books, but sometimes it's just too much. Sometimes I have to just shut it all off. All of it.
Which I think is good practice. I think we should all probably be better about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if we go to your parents' house or my parents, and there's always either music or the TV or the phone, someone's watching a video, it drives me crazy. I cannot. I'm like, turn it all off. I can't do it.
Yeah. And we're going to push into that silence, that alone, which we'll call solitude and silence in a moment. And especially we're going to get into that next week. It's going to be our topic of our conversation. But here's just an idea, just a thought, and especially for those of you that are listening, is you can probably relate to the time when you have those extreme conversations with yourself that are hyper negative, that you've chased, you've gone down some really deep, dark rabbit hole of things that never happened, and you've gotten yourself so worked up. And then you finally come to the point where you say, oh my goodness, will you listen to yourself? Those are the extreme moments. How many times do you think on a daily basis you have a negative conversation with yourself that's not extreme, but it is negative, that you don't even realize? Because you don't stop to listen until it gets extreme. How many conversations do you think you have with yourself? How many simple negative comments do you think you make that don't even register on the Richter scale because they're not extreme enough for you to rattle you into the present? What do you think?
A lot.
I bet it's a lot. I'm curious if there's research out there for that, because I think we're probably so immune to it or desensitized to it that we don't even recognize it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. It's just how we operate.
Yeah.
But I'd be willing to bet that we have far more negative thoughts or emotions than we do positive on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. I really don't know the answer to that question. I think it's probably different for everyone, and it probably depends on how intentional you are at cultivating, whatever mindset that you're. But you mentioned last week, Ryan, something you said. Bad news sells, I think is how you worded it, or bad news, and it's so much easier to latch on to that bad news or the negativity, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that can just live in our minds, and if we're not present and actually focused on what we're saying and the story we're telling ourselves, that can just fester, and then that becomes our reality. And again, this is not just about us making ourselves happier, although I hope you get happy as a result. But how do you think that's impacting your ministry on a daily basis with the people you come in contact with? If you have a negative outlook about people in general, how effective now are you as a minister of Jesus, as an ambassador of Christ to people?
Kendall had a deal in her Bible today she had written down. I forget exactly what it said. It was during the sermon whenever Joe was preaching, and it was talking about something about worship, but then it said your life, the way you live your life is your worship. And so, like, what do people see? Like, what are people seeing whenever they see how you live your life? And that's what it makes me think, because if you have an eternal hope and you believe in the Bible, then why would you not live in such a way that is positive? That, because that's what's coming for us. You know what I mean?
Glorification.
Yeah.
Heaven.
Like, why would you not?
Why not be fired up?
Yes. Because there's literally nothing that anybody can do to you. There's nothing that anyone can say to you that is going to change that.
Where, O death, is your victory?
Yeah.
Where is your sting?
I think you talked about your son, or not your son, but you were saying how sometimes we think that things are happening to us. And I think since I'm around mostly children all day, every day, that I have to really focus in on, sometimes they're doing it to you. They're, purposely doing it to you.
My kids are that way sometimes.
But sometimes they're not, but I take it personal.
Sure.
And so then I'm like, that's how you that's how you want to treat me,
Right.
But they're not meaning that.
Sure.
But if I take it as that, then my whole day will, then
Absolutely.
it'll take me down the wrong path. So
Yeah.
So then if you believe the Lord is good and that kids are good, how can you not be happy,
Yeah, so then you don't see things like throw up or, something as an inconvenient, like you have a better...
That's pretty positive.
Well,
I see that as inconvenient. I would tell you, that'd be good. That'd be good.
Well, so I guess it just depends, because on days that I am in a good headspace, I don't see it,
Sure.
I'm like, oh, it's okay, but if I'm not...
Yeah, you go, man, it's just, he's just a kid, she's just a kid.
Yeah.
And this is literally my job. I'm their parent. I'm supposed to teach them how to do this. This is what I signed up for, isn't it? Like, what did I think I was getting into? Right? It's like they're a tiny human. They don't know how to make it to the potty yet when they're sick.
Yeah.
Duh. But who taught me that? My parents. This is my job.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a good thing. Like, I get to teach them that, right? And it's just a matter of what you're saying to yourself, how we're interpreting the events that are happening to us. And are we seeing them through the lenses of a good God who's given us a good life, or are we seeing them through the lens of I'm the king or the queen of my world, and everybody else who doesn't fit into my agenda is an inconvenience and has to be controlled, corrected, or eliminated.
Right.
And hopefully don't do that one to your kids, but but that is a common thing in our culture today, to eliminate people who don't fit my agenda, right? Go ahead.
Well, I was just have a lot in my head right now. So as a staff, we're reading a book called Accidental Pharisees.
Okay.
And it's really good, and it steps on toes pretty badly. Go read it. I'd highly recommend it if you want to get your toes stepped on.
Okay.
But one thing it talks about in there is that sometimes we feel like we're a self-appointed Holy Spirit for everyone else, and so like it's our right as a Christian to pluck the weeds out all around us, and to eliminate the ones who aren't bearing fruit or whatever. Like it's our job. And the Pharisees and Middle Eastern culture in Jesus' day, that they kind of did that, right? They if you didn't live up to those standards, then you weren't worthy enough. And we find, whether we say we do it or not, I mean, I think sometimes we're guilty of being the Holy Spirit for everybody else. That's what I was thinking.
That's a good point.
Isn't there like a scripture that says you're not supposed, like something about goats and sheep or something, that you're not supposed to decide who's what? I don't know. Maybe I'm making stuff up, but
well, there is a goats and sheep. It's a pretty good one, when Jesus separates the sheep and the goats, and he doesn't say to the sheep, the enter into my rest. He doesn't say to them, you were really good at making sure everybody else did their job. He says, no, you clothed me and you fed me. And they said, when did we see you sick and in prison? And that's when, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And so I think, the natural question to wrap it up here is, okay, so if we can't tell a good story unless we're present enough to hear our story that we are telling, how do we become present? How do we practice presence? Can you develop that? Can you, is that something that just some people naturally are good at because it's their personality? Or can you actually practice and develop that? Is it a skill? Spoiler, the answer is yes, it is a skill, and there are some really ancient spiritual disciplines that have been foundational and formational for Christians for thousands of years that have helped them do that I want to share with you in our podcast next week. So, same time, same place next week. Hope you'll come back and tune in for another good episode.
That was a good teaser, by the way, like bringing people back.
That's right. All right. See you guys.
Thanks for listening to FBC Seminoles, The Table Podcast. A new episode will be released each Monday. We invite you to pull up a chair and join our table each week as we dig into God's Word together. We would love for you to join one of our Connect groups that meets throughout the week and worship with us on Sunday mornings at 9 or 10:30. If you'd like more information, you can call our church office at 432-758-3291 or visit our website at fbcseminole.org.